The United States today ordered the expulsion of 3 Venezuelan diplomats from Washington in a tit-for-tat, a response to the move by Venezuela. It's the latest ripple effect as anti-government protesters take to the barricades against the country's socialist government. CNN's Carl Penhall is reporting for us from Caracas. Carl?
These protests have been going on for 3 weeks now, Wolf, and all the time the opposition is trying to shift tactics to force its challenge to the socialist presidency of Nicolas Maduro. And we've seen this week the start of a new tactic that is throwing up barricades. Even the wealthy and middle classes are joining this street fight.
More wreckage to fortify opposition lines. Caracas's wealthier east side was blockaded Monday. Anti-government activists responding to the Twitter hashtag Day of the Barricades. I don't want to wait in food lines, I don't want to be kidnapped, I'm a hostage in my own home, she says. Scores of picket lines sprang up. The opposition seems to be beefing up its bid to topple Venezuela's socialist government. Outrage at soaring crime and a tanking economy triggered protests. Things are falling apart and we have to save the country. We have to get out on the streets because it's the only way, she says. But it's not only the middle classes up in arms.
This is a working class neighbourhood and should be a natural support base for the socialist government. But the people here say that they're fed up, they're turning against President Maduro and joining the opposition.
We'll be here till President Maduro leaves power, she says. But across on the city's poorer west side, there are few signs government loyalists are deserting en masse. Pro-regime motorcycle clubs, just the latest core group to show public support for President Nicolas Maduro. The president insists the opposition is trying to stage a US-funded coup attempt. The right-wing extremists are being marginalized in Venezuela, and it's us, the revolutionaries, who are getting support from other countries, the president said. Not all opposition protesters agree on the changing tactics, especially since the barricades are in the opposition's own neighborhoods. This is one of the most controversial tactics, a nylon washing line. They've strung it across the road and they'll pull it tight. They aim to bring down what they say are government thugs riding motorcycles aiming to terrorize their neighborhood. Homemade fire shredders too. The pro-government loyalists are armed and we aren't, so we're shielding behind barricades and wait for them to arrive, he says. As the day wore on, there was no word of serious clashes, but the battle lines have been drawn.
Senator, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
Let's talk about Venezuela right now. You know, the president of Venezuela, he had some sharp words for you. He called you, and I'm translating from the Spanish, the craziest of the crazies because of your views on what's going on in Venezuela right now. What should the U.S. be doing in Venezuela?
First of all, let me just say about this individual, Mr. Maduro, he's someone who actually said Hugo Chavez after his death appeared to him in the form of a bird. So I'm not sure who the crazy is here. All I've done is point to the human rights abuses that are occurring on the streets of Venezuela every single day. There are now documented instances, numerous, of government troops and some of these civilian militias that they have armed and they have trained who have shot and killed student protesters. This all began as a student protest 2 weeks ago because the government wasn't doing enough to go after the rapists and sexual assault cases on campus. And of course, the government cracked down, but didn't crack down on the rapists, cracked down on the students, and this of course has spiraled into this broader discontent.
What should the U.S. do, if anything? We have limited influence.
Well, first of all, assume we should be involved in care. Right now, I heard yesterday the State Department said they are concerned. They shouldn't be concerned about what's happening in Venezuela. They should be outraged by it. And it should be getting the same level of attention as what's happening in Egypt or what's happening in Ukraine or other parts of the world, because this is actually closer to us. The second is, and I think we now have documented instances of human rights abuses, we should put together a package of sanctions against these individuals who are committing these atrocities and these crimes. And beyond that, I would say that we should study whether, in fact, we are at a stage where we should explore some specific sanctions against this Venezuelan government. the people, maybe a moratorium on private investment or what have you. But we need to begin, there has to be consequences for what's going on. So we need to lead the argument.
Is there a connection between what's happening in Venezuela and Cuba, which is another subject close to your heart?
Well, the connection is the Cubans get free and cheap oil from the Venezuelans. So their interest is keeping this regime in place because they're their benefactors. The Cubans have been deeply involved in the government apparatus in Venezuela for many, many years, going back to Hugo Chavez. One of the chants in the streets now among the protesters is, we don't want to become Cuba. And Cuba is clearly involved in assisting the Venezuelan government with both personnel and training and equipment to carry out these repressive activities, including, for example, the ability to shut down Twitter and social media. And I think it's a broader part of an agenda that Cuba has in furthering terrorism around the world. As we saw very recently, a UN report found that Cuba helped North Korea evade UN sanctions. So this is part of the course of the Cuban regime.
But you tweeted on February 23rd, Havana's puppet, Nicolas Maduro, can attack me, but world sees what he is doing to people of Venezuela.
That's what he is. He is a puppet of Raul Castro, as Chavez was of Fidel. He's largely controlled by what the Cuban government tells him they want him to do. And I think within Venezuela, within the Venezuelan government, and certainly within the Venezuelan population, it's created a tremendous amount of resentment.
So you see targeted sanctions as one option right now?
Certainly.
Is there any indication the administration is ready to do that?
Well, there's no indications the administration is even thinking too much about Venezuela right now, and that's unfortunate. I think we hope to be able to change that. But I think this is part of a broader issue with foreign policy in this administration. They largely view these things as challenges to be managed rather than causes to be advanced. And so the interest of the administration seems to be stability.
If you had your way, if you were Secretary of State or President of the United States, what would you do right now?
Well, the first thing we have to understand is that many of these Venezuelan officials in their government have assets in the United States. The Venezuelan government have operations in the United States, non-diplomatic operations. Those should be targeted to be closed down, and those individuals need to be sanctioned.